How you doing, man? I haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, good. Thanks again for taking your time. So it's gonna be kind of weird because like we have like a whole like classroom setup, but like the camera is like kind of off.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's okay.
I'm gonna be looking at like the board, but I'm right here. So I guess we'll get started. For those of you that don't know this man, I'm surprised you're not. If you're an NFL fan, you claim you're an NFL fan, you don't know this guy. It's kind of surprising. It's Dean Blandino, NFL rules analyst for Fox Sports. Previously served as NFL's vice president of officiating from 2013 to 2017. Dean manages the instant replay program for the past 6 years, and he served as a replay official for two Super Bowls, and is currently head officiating of the XFL. Dean, can you just talk about? I think we could start off with your how you got to your position and what came and the obstacles that you had to face.
Yeah, so for me, it was interesting because I don't have a normal background in terms of how people get into officiating. I didn't officiate on the field. It wasn't something that I was exposed to at a young age. Played sports my whole life. I love the NFL, love just football, the game itself, and grew up in New York. I went to Hofstra University, which is a university in New York, and I just wanted to stay involved in sports. I had a communications degree. I did TV production, worked both behind the camera and in front of the camera, and knew that was something that I was interested in as well. And I just kind of sent my resume to the NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA, and just hoping that there was an opportunity. And the NFL had a couple of internships available, and I interviewed in a couple of different departments: PR, human resources, and one was officiating. And they offered me the position in officiating, and I jumped at it. Just wanted to get my foot in the door, and I was doing everything from editing videotapes to assisting with statistics and keeping track of the penalty foul numbers and things like that. And back then, the editing, it wasn't digital, right? So we didn't have editing software where you could do it digitally. So everything was tape to tape. So when I was editing a tape, I had to watch it on one screen and record it to another machine. And that's how I kind of learned officiating. I learned what pass interference was and holding and things like that. And in 1999, instant replay, the competition committee voted to bring it back in, and I was heavily involved in that implementation, both on the technical side and on the rules side. Became a replay official, and my career progressed from there. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it all went down.
How would you like? How difficult would you say your job is?
Well, it's difficult in that, look, with officiating and what I've learned about officiating, it doesn't matter. You could be really good at what you do, and people are still going to disagree with you. They're still going to disagree with calls. And that's why it's so important in my role with the XFL now to show the process and to be transparent. So if you're watching the game, you can listen in and see what our process is, and you might not always agree with it, but at least you have a better understanding as to why we made the call that we made. And that's always been a challenge, is trying to educate, because the rules can be very complicated. And one of my jobs as a rules analyst for Fox Sports is to educate our announcers, because they're the ones that everybody's listening to, and they're the ones that are going to be commenting on these rules more than anyone else, and we want them to be up to speed. And so it's a challenging rule book, and making sure that our announcers are quoting the rules correctly and explaining them, and then when we come on the air, we can do that as well. So the people watching the game have a better understanding.
Gotcha, gotcha. Going back to officiating, what are your current thoughts of NFL officiating and the future of it?
So right now, I think officiating, it's I don't think the scrutiny has ever been greater. The now with social media, with access to video, with everything that we have from a technology standpoint, the microscope on officiating is so intense. And so I think officials are actually better than they were 20, 30 years ago. I think they're more prepared. They have more access to video. They have more access to communication, whether it's Zoom calls like we're doing now, things like that. Whereas when I first got involved in officiating in the mid 90s, it wasn't like you could jump online and see pull up a bunch of NFL games or college games, things like that. So I think they're better prepared. I think they are better, but I think the scrutiny is higher. But I think we are in a transitional period where, and I'm sure if you watch the NFL playoffs, you saw a lot of this where there's more replay that's being injected into the game, where they're coming from replay official upstairs in the press box, people in New York in the NFL's Game Day Central, and they're communicating with the crew because they have access to video to help the crew. So I think we're going to see more of that as we kind of head into the future.
Gotcha, gotcha. I think this is a question that I don't know if there are any Cowboys fans in here, but I feel like I just need to do it. In 2014, did Des Bryant catch that ball?
So according to the rules at the time, no, he didn't, and that's a call that I was involved in myself. Gene Steratore was the referee, and the rule at the time, that call was not. I've had much more difficult calls to make, but that call was not difficult according to the rule. At that time, if you were going to the ground, it didn't matter if you made any kind of reach or anything like that. If you were going to the ground, you had to maintain control of the ball when you hit the ground. He didn't. It was incomplete by rules, so we made it incomplete. I do think that the competition committee, after the fact, a couple of years later, did look at that and change the rule. And I think that's a good change because I know why a lot of people see that and think it should be a catch. But according to the rule at the time, it wasn't.
Put it up there for sure. I wanted to go back to something that actually was reported this week. I started on Sports Illustrated. The tush push, according to you, it may be out the door. Your thoughts on that and just how the Eagles just were so dominant with it. Do you think it's possible that they could eliminate that?
Yeah. So look, the Eagles, kudos to the Eagles. They were very, very successful with it, and it's perfectly within the rules. And I think that's something that the Eagles used obviously to their advantage. You watch the Super Bowl; they made a couple of third down, fourth down conversions with that. The tush push, whatever we're calling it. In college, they called it the Bush push. We're calling it the tush push. But I think the competition committee will look at this because I think there's a couple of things at play. When you think about that, there's a safety element to it. When the competition committee meets, they always look at areas of the game where players might be at risk. And when you think about those pileups that happen with the quarterback, especially in between, and players are pushing him from behind, defensive players are pushing from the front. What is the defense going to attempt to do next to try to combat that? Are they going to dive at the legs of the offensive lineman? Do they jump over the top? Do we create more head-to-head contact? So I think the competition committee will look at that. I think the other thing is, to me, and this is just my personal belief, it's not an exciting play. The NFL is really to showcase the athleticism, the skills of the players. And not to say that, look, there's leverage, there's force, there's all of those things involved in that play. But I just don't think it's the type of play that we want to see, 10, 15 times a game, because what we're going to see, the Eagles were so successful. We're going to see other teams start to copy this, and maybe they won't be as successful as the Eagles, but it's going to become more the norm. And I think the committee, and it's not like they have to invent a new rule. Prior to 2008, that was the rule. You couldn't push a ball carrier to gain more yardage to assist him. They took it out. I think it's just as simple as putting that back in and making sure the officials officiate it.
Gotcha. I think that's enough questions from me. I'm going to open it up to everyone. Does anyone have any? Yeah, go ahead.
One question I had is officiating at the XFL. What are some rules that you think could translate from the XFL over to the NFL, and just how also they do it differently there, so replays, how that would be able to translate as well?
Did you hear that, D?
Yeah, I did. So the rules, the XFL rules that could translate to the NFL, and I think there are a couple, and I know. So the NFL competition committee will meet next week in Indianapolis in conjunction with the Combine, and the NCAA rules committee will also meet next week, and I'll be a part of those meetings. And I think they'll look at a couple of things. I think they'll look at the XFL kickoff, because the kickoff return in both college and the NFL during certain years, that's had a higher rate of injury because of sometimes the high speed collisions that can occur, the players running longer distances, the type of stops and starts or quick cuts. So you see more injuries. I think the XFL kickoff was designed to keep the return in the game, but eliminate some of those high-speed collisions and those long-distance runs, especially by the kicking team. So I think they'll look at that. I think some of the timing rules on the college side, where we're running the clock, we're not stopping the clock for first downs outside 2 minutes. We're only doing it in the last 2 minutes. And even running the clock after an incomplete pass outside 2 minutes, I think that's something. And like you mentioned, the replay process, being able to review from a replay standpoint, us in the command center, we can look at any reviewable aspect of the play, catch, no catch, scoring play, fumble, down by contact, that type of thing, and giving the coach an opportunity to challenge one decision any game. We feel like that gives the coach that added kind of safety blanket in case there's something late in the game that could potentially have an outcome. And I think the NFL and college will look at all of those things and have some good, healthy discussions to possibly implement at some point in the future.
I actually have a question about the DC Defenders game last night. We saw lemons being thrown.
Yeah.
And the ref was mic'd up, and he said, "Don't worry about it, after the drive." Is there any more thought that goes into that? Is there a certain process where they would stop the game, or is that officiated at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. So obviously, I was in our command center last night for the game, and I was communicating with the referee. And a couple of things. When you have a situation like that, what you're most concerned about is the safety of the people on the field, the players, the officials, the coaches, the people that are working in the stadium, the security people. And so when you have lemons that are being thrown from a long distance, that could hit somebody in the head, and you never know. So what the referee would do in that situation, when we do have people at risk on the field, will suspend play, get everybody to the sideline, and allow security to get into the stands and get whether it's pull people out of the stands or take the lemons away, whatever it may be. So there's a situation like that came up. That was unusual. You typically don't see that, but you do see that from time to time, where you're just concerned about the safety of the people on the field. And we don't have any rules in place where you're gonna penalize the home team, because that can have an opposite effect, right? Where people will get even more riled up. So you just want to kind of calm it down, get everybody off the field, suspend play, go to break, let security handle it, and then like it happened last night, it died down, and we were able to finish the game without any issues.
Yeah.
From your time in the NFL, I remember there was a Bills game this year. Some of the Bills fans were throwing snowballs on the field, and they at one point threatened to give them the 15-yard penalty for throwing snowballs. Is there a rule in the book that can give them that opportunity?
It was tough to hear. Can you repeat that? Or
Yeah, we said
for the Bills kind of game this year, and some of the fans were the officials threatened to give them the penalty. Is that an actual thing?
So during that Bills snowball game, the officials were threatening fans that they were giving the penalty. Is that actual rule in the book?
No, it's not. It's not a rule. I think the official at that point just was trying to just do anything, but there's no rule in the book that says that you can penalize the fans for something like that. And the problem with that sometimes is you just don't know. Obviously, it's in Buffalo, so the majority of people are Bills fans, but you don't know. Maybe it's a Dolphins fan, maybe it's somebody else that is just. So you want to avoid that at all costs in terms of. But there is no rule. There's some other non-player rules of conduct that you could look at, but there's no specific rule in that situation. It's interesting because there used to be a rule way back. 25, 30 years ago for crowd noise, that if the crowd got too loud, the team would get a penalty, and it became kind of a joke because the referee, there's one clip, if you could probably find it on YouTube, it's in Detroit, and the referee's trying to get the crowd to quiet down, and they're just getting louder and louder and louder, and so the NFL took that rule out.
So in society, gambling is becoming more and more prominent. What kind of measures do you have in place to ensure that the refs aren't gambling on games and that relatives or distant friends? from?
Yeah, it's a good question. As you think about now with gambling, sports betting, and how that the NFL, especially college. I mean, college still that there's really they've kept the distance with the betting, but with the NFL kind of embracing now, you have a team in Vegas. Right, 10 years ago, people would have said a team in Vegas, there's no shot, and now you're seeing that you're seeing the gambling and the connection. So I think it's really important that the league has really strong processes in place. And what happens, and this goes back a long time, when officials, before they're hired in the NFL, they go through an extensive background check. And that's through NFL security, and they go through financial records, they go through bank accounts, they talk to whether it's they even go door to door and talk to their neighbors. Whether it's business partners, colleagues, things like that. So it is an extensive background check that they go through just to be able to get into the league. And then once they're in the league, they're monitored and there's spot checks. And there's also a group that works with the NFL that monitors the betting lines and looks for things that maybe abnormalities with the betting lines that could be tied to calls on the field, fouls, penalties, things like that. So there's a lot of processes already in place to ensure, because right, if you remember with the NBA and they had a scandal with one of their former officials, Tim Donaghy, and so it can happen. And that's always the nightmare. That was always something that kept me up at night when I was head of the officiating department, that you never want to have something like that. And you have a lot of controls in place to ensure that, look, if an official has, $1,000 in their bank account on Friday, and then Monday after the game, they have 200,000, that's a red flag, right? That's something that the league can look into and make sure that we're not, nothing nefarious is going on.
So like, there's a lot of referees who are paired with betting trends in terms of like unders or overs, and tougher calls. And like you look at this is a random example, but in the NBA, Scott Foster, like CP3's record against him is like 0-22. Is that considered in meetings? And are they like make sure you call the game fair? Do they talk about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's always going to be those statistical. Maybe it's an anomaly where one referee. I think there was with Carl Cheffers going into the AFC Championship game, or actually going into the Super Bowl. There was concern because there was the Chiefs' record in games that he officiated was not very good. And I think you look at those things and you look for those trends. We would even break it down to officials, the calls for the home and away team, but even the calls, certain officials are on the sideline. Do they call more fouls when they're on that team's sideline, or more fouls against that team's opponent when they're on that sideline? So you're always looking for those things. A lot of that is just there's 7 officials. The referee is not making every call. So it's a little bit different than basketball, where basketball officials make a lot more calls during the game, where a referee might throw their flag 2 or 3 times a game, where a basketball official is calling 30 or 40 fouls a game. So I think basketball, there's more opportunity there, but the league absolutely looks at that. They look at those trends, but for the officials are evaluated and graded, and it's such a comprehensive system that they're not going to risk their livelihood, because if they don't grade out well, they'll get let go. They won't get postseason assignments. And so they're evaluated very heavily by internally within the leadership of the officiating department. So they're not going to, make a mistake that they're going to get evaluated on just because of a team affiliation or something like that.
So during your time at the NFL as VP of officiating and now the XFL, you're of course in the room for like changing the rules for like the game. What was like the process like? What statistics did you guys use? What inputs did you guys use from like people like on the sidelines, or like people refs like throughout the games, or like through fans, or outside of that?
Yeah, my experience with the NFL, that competition committee, that process, that's an extensive process. And sometimes it could take years for a rule to change after the discussions begin. And you take it from a lot of different places. You get input from coaches, you get input from players, you can get input from fans, officials. So there's a lot of different resources that you use. And we did a study when I was at the NFL, And we talked to fans. We had people that would go to games and talk to fans about what they like, what they didn't like. And one of the top things that we heard about fans, whether it's at home or in the stadium, is they don't like a lot of interruptions. They don't mind if the game is 3 hours or 3 hours and 10 minutes, but they don't like a lot of interruptions and a lot of downtime. And I think that's a challenge because when you think about football, compare football to soccer, where soccer is more free flowing. There's less stoppages. Where football, right after every play, there's a huddle. There's a lot of downtime, and so you take all those resources. And when we looked at the XFL rules prior to the 2020 season, we talked to a lot of people, and that downtime was something that we really wanted to focus on. That's why we went to a shorter play clock. That's why we run the clock after incomplete passes, so we don't have a lot of standing around and people just waiting, because in a 3-hour window of NFL football, there's only about 16 minutes of actual action, and everything else is downtime. But how can you limit that downtime or make that downtime more enjoyable for the fans? And that's something we're always striving for.
So it seems like there's a lot of things that get off early, and sometimes when they're shooting the back foot, and I know they're allowed to do that, but like for some specific players, it seems like it's a weird false start. Like Lane Johnson, it seems like he's getting off early every time. Like, why are they not calling that? And
yeah, that's a good question. And I think what's happening is if you look at the foul numbers the last couple of years, they've started to come down. Historically, between both teams, number of fouls called, it's been between 15 and 16 fouls per game. And the last couple of years, that's dropped to about 12 or 13 per game. And what's happening, and this comes from officiating leadership as well, they are not calling as much on the line of scrimmage. They're letting more go. And when you do that, if you don't call the formations according to the rule, or you let the tackles go a little bit early, that's what you start to see. The players know, they're smart, they get it, they know where the bar is, and that's where you're seeing, look, Lane Johnson is tremendous, he's an all-pro, he's really good, but if you give him an extra split second, right, there's no way that defensive end is going to be able to get around that edge and get to the quarterback. So I think that's a problem that the league has to look at, because I notice it. And when you watch a game, though, if you can see it at full speed, then that's a false start. If you have to slow it down and go frame by frame, the officials, our eyes don't work that way. We don't see it that many frames per second. But if you can see it at full speed, then they need to call it. And I think we're seeing some of that, especially this year, creep into the game, where those tackles are getting that early start, and that's a pretty big advantage.
So in terms of going off of that, I know a lot of fans are upset about the delay of game calls and lack thereof because officials looking up and down and how that works. What's the process? Is there any process of like automation of that? Do you think that's going to be considered? And then on top of that, just artificial intelligence in general. With all the technology we have, shouldn't there be like no discrepancy in calls at a certain point?
Yeah, the play clock it's a good question. It's always been a healthy debate, because there is that. And I think there's a balance between the human element and technology, and what standard are we trying to achieve? Because when they put in replay in this technology, it wasn't to get every call right. It was to fix an obvious mistake in a significant situation. And we've drifted further and further away from that. And when you think about the play clock mechanics, the back judge, who's the deep official in the middle of the field, they're responsible for that. And so the mechanics are, they're watching the play clock, and then when they see it go to zero, they have to look to the snap. And if the ball is moving at that point, there's no foul. If the ball is still sitting on the ground, it's a foul. So there is a delay. I think we sometimes exaggerate the delay. It's not 1 or 2 seconds. That delay should be a split second. And I think from a mechanics standpoint, the officials certainly could tighten that up. I don't know if, and we'd have to see, the technology is certainly there. You could have a red light. You could have something that goes off that to identify the play clock has expired and come in and say, no, that play doesn't count. But do we want a bunch of plays negated over a fraction of a second? Do we want to get that technical as it pertains to the game and replay, because it's played by humans, coached by humans, and officiated by humans. And for me personally, I like having that human element, but also adding technology on the big plays. And I'm just not sure if we want to be micromanaging every play clock situation. Certainly, maybe it's the end of a game and it's a game-winning touchdown and the play clock expired and the officials don't call it. I think you could certainly look at correcting that, but I wouldn't want to see every potential play clock situation be micromanaged to that extent.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, going off that last question, what ways do you see artificial intelligence improving the quality of
Can you repeat it?
So artificial intelligence and like, what do you see that can improve the quality of the game?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to that technology. How much technology do we want to incorporate into the game? Because, and certainly AI, I mean, it's incredible. Who knows where that's going? I mean, just the stuff that we're seeing now is pretty amazing. And I think the league is certainly going to they always look at new technologies, and they always look at ways to improve officiating and utilize that technology. Because if we can all see something at home or wherever we're watching the game, then the officials, right, we should give them those tools as well. And again, I think there's an opportunity for more training. There's an opportunity for getting the officials, whether it's to make them more full-time, and they spend a ton of time right now, studying during the week, looking at film, being prepared, taking rules exams. But I think there's more opportunity there to get them with the technology to create simulators. We tested virtual reality headsets where you could put a headset on and you'd have a series of plays just like you're on the field, and it's rapid fire and you have to make decisions. So I think that's where the technology and like I said, the AI stuff is really cool. And I think there's going to be more things that you can incorporate into training the officials. I just don't know if we're ever going to, I know Major League Baseball talks about the electronic strike zone and things like that. I don't know if we're ever going to get there, because again, no one's perfect, and I don't think we want to watch a game that every call is perfect, because just to get there, I don't think the game is going to flow the same. I think again, it's just part of that human element that makes the game so great.
Yeah. Sorry, Joe.
Talking about some of the human element of the game, is there full reason in 2019 was the only season with the NFL pass interference challenge and kind of what that looked like?
Yeah. And in my experience, whenever you change a rule because of one play, that doesn't work out very well, because what you're looking for is something that is a trend or something that's happening more so than just once. And look, that was a big call in the game. You can make a case that the Saints should have went to the Super Bowl. So obviously, and it was a big miss, and the officials should have gotten it. And so they changed the rule, but I don't think they ever found the right standard. It felt like early in the season, the bar to overturn a call on the field or add a foul was so high that people just got fed up. And I think coaches got fed up and said, why am I going to waste a challenge if we're never going to overturn anything? And I think it got better, but I just don't think the competition committee felt that we ever reached a good standard. And to me, I think there's a couple of things at play there. I think you have to look at that and say, we're going to re-officiate the play. You can't just say, hey, it has to be so blatantly obvious. If you're going to look at pass interference, you have to re-officiate it, look at the video and say, do you want that foul called or not? And if the answer to that is yes, then put the flag down. In my experience with the NFL, and I was a part of the NFL beginning in 1995, I've never seen a rule change go in for 1 year and not even get voted the next year, get voted on, even if it failed. And that was the first time I saw that. So it really, it didn't go very well. And I think membership, the teams just didn't want to go down that path anymore.
For an official, what is the toughest call to make on the field? And then also, what stadium, from your experience, is the harshest for officials to officiate in?
Yeah, I think the toughest call on the field, people always say that it's a common right. You could call holding on any play. And that's not necessarily true. There's an opportunity for holding on every play because that's right. Every play has blocking and defenders trying to beat a block. And so there is the opportunity for it. I think holding is so subjective. I think it's tough because there's only 7 officials and there's 22 players. But I think the downfield stuff, like pass interference, is really tough because they're moving at such high speeds. There's a lot of what we call hand fighting, where the receiver and the defender are kind of jockeying for position. And it's happening, and a lot of times it's happening 30, 40 yards downfield where the official has to get into position and see that. So I think those are probably two of the tougher calls. The places that are really tough, it's the old Raiders stadium. So in Alameda, the Coliseum there was probably it was my favorite because the fans, they were right on top of you, and they, the black hole, and it was just such a cool environment. But they could be really bad to the officials, especially if it wasn't going the Raiders' way. I think a lot of the older stadiums are while they're great to be a part of and watch a game, the fans are more on top of you, and that creates issues. But with football, I think the officials are more insulated from the fans because of just the way it's set up. Whereas in basketball, you think about the fans are right on top of the court, where football, you don't have to worry about that. The only time you have to, you'll hear something is when you're going into the locker room and you have to kind of go under the tunnel and things like that. But there isn't, I just say that the old Raiders stadium was a tough place to, for officials.
Our makeup calls are real thing. Like a lot of the time, like there's an obvious call they miss, and then maybe coming out at halftime, like a little bit later on the game, they'll just make another terrible call, but for the other side.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and it's something that, and look, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't know what's going on in every official's head. I do know that because they're evaluated so strictly, is that if they blow a call, they don't want to then blow another one, and now they get downgrades, right? And they don't want to they already got one downgrade. I don't want to get 2 downgrades, because when it comes to the Super Bowl and the championship game, 1 or 2 downgrades could make the difference in you getting that game or not getting that game. And so while makeup calls, I think that's a popular term, and I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's never happened, but I think the officials today they're just focused on one play, and they're focused on this next play, and I got to get this one right. And they know it's not like they go in at halftime. With the NFL, it's only a 12-minute halftime. It's not like they go in and look at video. They have enough time to go in. Maybe they use the restroom. Maybe they have like a piece of fruit, some water, and then they got to go back out to get the teams out. They give 2-minute warnings before halftime to each team. So they got to get from their locker room to the home and visiting team locker room. So it's not like they're sitting there watching video going, oh, we blew that one, we blew that one. So I think makeup calls is kind of a myth. But when you see one call go against one team and then a little bit later go against the other team, I understand why people would say that.
Yeah. So let's say hypothetically it's a big game and it's 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 8 at like 15-yard line, and the refs have been leniently calling like defensive holding all game, and towards the end of the game, the right call is made, but potentially at a bad time, and it wasn't being called all game. Do you think that ref would get like a downgrade, or would they technically be correct?
Is this like a general? Is this like a general thing, or is this a specific situation that may have happened recently?
Yeah, certainly hypothetical.
So yeah, that's an interesting one, because, and I've thought about this quite a bit, and not just because of what happened in the Super Bowl, but you want your officials to call the game consistently. First quarter, fourth quarter. If it's a foul in the first quarter, call it in the fourth quarter. If it's a foul week 1, it's a foul in the Super Bowl. And that's the only way you can truly be consistent. Because if you tell officials, okay, officiate to the situation, then you're creating a different standard, right? What was a foul in the first quarter is no longer a foul in the fourth quarter. And then the players, the coaches, everybody has to adjust. So I do think when you watch you think about the Super Bowl and they didn't call anything early in terms of defensive holding. They missed one early in the game. I think it was the Eagles' first or the Chiefs' first drive, and it was a third down, and they should have had a pass interference call. And so completely get the question, totally get why we think that. It's just tough when an official sees the jersey grab and makes the call. And maybe in the earlier situations, I think sometimes we forget is the officials only get one look at it from their perspective. And maybe in other situations, they didn't get the right look. They were blocked out by a player. They didn't have the right angle, where in that situation, the official had a good look, saw the jersey grab, and made the call. It was just such a big situation. And I go back and forth. You never want to say, just let them play, don't call anything at the end of the game, because inevitably players understand that and they'll take advantage of that. And one team will gain an unfair advantage. And sometimes you can affect the game just as much by not throwing your flag than throwing it. So, it's one of those deals where, again, you want to be as consistent as possible. And so you can't officiate to the situation. You have to officiate the same standard throughout.
So you'd say that we did as practical play for that referee?
One more time?
So that referee didn't receive any penalty for that?
No, I would imagine that the NFL didn't downgrade that official for that call, because by rule it was a foul. And look, I'm not going to sit here. I would rather that flag not be thrown, because to me it didn't jump out as this big time. And personally, as a fan, I wanted to see the Eagles get the ball back and see how the game was going to play out. But by rule, it's a foul, and the official saw it, and I can't sit here and say it was incorrect.
Any other questions? Take a couple more. Go ahead.
So, do you ever think that? I know that you said that the best experience is failure, which I heard like the challenge with that is a failure. Do you think they could ever get into a spot where they're kind of using a replay booth to overturn maybe like obvious, like, okay, face mask or something like that? Because sometimes it's like it's just so obvious, and it's like, how did they not call it? And if the replay booth would be able to do that, it would help a lot. But I know it'd be hard because a lot of them are subjective.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And I think there are opportunities where, because if they call a face mask and the replay comes up and shows that he clearly grabbed the jersey and didn't grab the mask, why can't we correct that? And I think there will come a time where they do correct that. But I think people then, what the concern always is, okay, well, what is obvious? Because like you said, a lot of those calls are very subjective. So where's the standard? And you just have to find the right standard where it's got to be so obvious, one replay where everybody can look at it and agree. And that's something, when I was making replay decisions for the NFL, I would always try to take a step back and say, okay, I can convince myself that the ball hit the ground, but can I convince 100 people in a room to agree that the ball hit the ground? And if I can, then that's the standard that is really clear and obvious. And so I think we'll get there. I really do, especially as it pertains to player safety. We're doing it in the XFL. If that situation happens in the XFL, us from the command center, we'll radio to the officials to pick up the flag. Or if it should have been a flag, we'll radio to them to put a flag down. And I think the NFL will get there, but again, it's just going to take some time to kind of work what types of plays and what is the standard to overturn.
I have two questions, but I'm going to start with one. So are refs allowed to interact with players and maybe ask for like autographs after the game, or are they told not to interact with them at all? How does that work?
Yeah, they're not. They're definitely discouraged. I know we had a situation this year with the Tampa and Mike Evans and the official going up after the game, and just the perception of that is not good, right? Because so we always tell our officials, look, you've got to communicate. You can't ignore the players, and there's relationships. Officials that have been in the league for 10 years and players that have been in the league for 10 years, they're going to know each other. They're going to they're going to officiate and play in the same games over the course of those 10 years. So there's relationships, but they're professional relationships. And they're, officials are not supposed to ask for autographs. They're not supposed to. And we always tell the officials, and we would do it in the league office, if you have a charity, if you have some cause that you need a player, maybe it's a signed football, maybe it's something, come through the league office. We'll communicate with the team's PR, and we'll do it, we'll do it away from the football field, because again, it's just a bad look when you have that, because like I said, with gambling and fantasy and everything else that's riding on it, people look at that and they think, oh, okay, so that official is getting an autograph from Mike Evans or doing this. What were they giving calls to Mike Evans or calls to the Bucks? So they are definitely discouraged from doing that. And when they do things like that, there's discipline involved.
And off of that, are refs allowed to publicly have like a favorite team? Like, let's say, can they wear like a Giants shirt on their Instagram post? And then for you personally, I saw on your Twitter that your son's a Giants fan. Are you allowed to have a team, and are you a Giants fan being from New York?
Yeah, so officials are not we always tell officials we discourage them from having social media altogether. But if they do, they're not allowed to post pictures of them in their officiating uniforms, post updates of where they are, their schedule, things like that, and absolutely not post pictures of themselves in any kind of team paraphernalia. Because again, just the environment that we're in, that stuff gets out. So, but look, officials, and I went through this myself. I grew up in New York. I grew up a Giants fan, a big Giants fan as a kid. But once I got into officiating, and you lose that team affiliation because you're so ensconced in the officiating and making sure the games are officiated correctly. And the other thing is, when Tom Coughlin is yelling at me and calling me every name in the book on the phone, I am definitely not a Giants fan at that point. But now that I'm out of officiating and I'm more, on the TV side, it's not discouraged. We'll be in the studio with Fox Sports, and Michael Strahan is screaming during the Giants games, and Jimmy Johnson with the Cowboys and Dolphins, and everybody has their team affiliation. So on the TV side, it's fine. Obviously, when you're on the air, you're not gonna have any kind of, or any kind of perception. But with officials, they don't. All they do is they see the color of the jersey. They really, you'll ask officials sometimes, they don't even know the final score of the game, because they're just focused on play in and play out, and they don't even see, whether it was the Bucs or the Chiefs or the Raiders, whatever it is. So you kind of lose that team affiliation the more you get involved in officiating.
I mean, I'm a Giants fan myself, and so I should confirm, when you see Danny Dime ripping off 80-yard runs, you got to be sitting there celebrating with your son.
I'm excited. I like, he cut down on the turnovers. I just think we got to figure out, we're going to sign him long term. What are they doing with Saquon? They got a lot of cap room, some draft capital. I'm excited about their future.
Yeah, thank you.
Enough Giants propaganda.
So in recent years, especially this year, I feel like there are a lot of calls on roughing the passer that may feel like a bit unnecessary, or we're extremely roughing the passer. But then there's also this year we had the safety aspect, because we Tua had the huge the concussion and all of that. What is the process that NFL is taking to have a fair balance? So keeping the safety of the players in mind, but also making sure that there's the competitive nature with sacks and all that.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And when the competition committee meets, there's things so player safety is always number one, competitive equity. And that's maintaining the offense and defensive balance, right? And officiating consistency. Those are the big things when you look at rules changes and points of emphasis, because there is, obviously, we saw the Tua situation, scary. And you think about the quarterback position, couple things. The quarterback is in a defenseless posture more so than any other player on the field, right? Because they've got the ball, at the start of every offensive play. And when they're passing, they're in that passing posture. They can't protect themselves. So that's number one. The position is such a premium position. Look, the reality is the popularity of the league and things like that, that position is so important. So you want to keep that position healthy. You want really good people, players. And we've got amazing players right now when you look at a lot of the quarterbacks around the league. But there is that balance of allowing the defense to also make plays and not penalize the defense for what are really legal tackles. And I think the league has done a good job, but I think right now we may be leaning more towards a lot of these body weight fouls and things. I think it's become very difficult for the defensive players, especially defensive linemen, when they're moving at full speed and they're a big body and they're trying to get the quarterback on the ground. And some of these quarterbacks are not easy to tackle. And it's almost impossible for them to keep their body weight off entirely. So I think that's something the league needs to look at. And really, when it comes to driving the quarterback to the ground, doing something extra, additional, that truly is unnecessary. So the league looks at all of that. And I think that's, it's really important because everybody says, oh, was the game a couple of years ago, the Rams and the Chiefs. I think it was a Monday night game and it was like 53-48. Oh, what a great game. I don't think anybody wants to see every game be 53-48. I think that there's something to be said about that defensive balance as well, because if the offense is just scoring every drive, then there's no drama there. It's like, okay, whoever has the ball last is going to win. And I think that competitive balance is so important.
All right, we'll have one last one. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering, when would you consider a ball to be intentional? So in the Super Bowl, on the pass interference play, it didn't look like Juju was gonna like get the ball like regardless if he was like interfered with. So I was just wondering when you would consider.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think what the difference is that they called holding, they didn't call pass interference. And with defensive holding, the pass being catchable doesn't matter because holding occurs before the pass. If the ball's in the air, then it's pass interference, then the ball has to be catchable. So I think that's the key difference. And the officials saw the jersey grab, and that's why the official threw the flag. But the pass being catchable only applies to defensive pass interference and when the ball's in the air. Defensive holding doesn't matter. It can occur at the line of scrimmage, doesn't have to be beyond 5 yards, and it doesn't matter where the pass eventually goes.
Well, that was great questions, guys. Really appreciate it. And before we head out, Dean, do you want to let the people know where they can find you?
Yeah, I mean, follow me on Twitter at Dean Blandino. I'm on Instagram at Dean.Blandino. And yeah, check out XFL.com. Check out XFL on Twitter. Yeah, and it's just, any questions, love to, if you have a question, DM me, shoot me a note on Twitter. And yeah, love to. And Abdul, if you want to share my email, that's cool too. Anybody has any questions or no problem.
Definitely. Yeah, he responds to DMs. That's how I got him. So, thanks again, Dean, and hopefully we'll see you in the future, man.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, everyone.